Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Restoring Balance, a Decolonized Approach to Burnout Prevention and Recovery with Vanessa and Ariana of Decolonize and Rize. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Seraine Squawkin. I am Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian settler on my father's side. I will be your moderator for today's discussion, and joining us behind the scenes is our production assistant, Kira. She'll be interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you're looking after yourself, and if at any point in time you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves.
Wonderful. Chimigwech. Thank you, Seraine, for the welcome. It's so good to see so many names and faces that I imagine are behind the names that are joining from what looks like all over the place here. I've loved seeing where folks are tuning in from. And as Vanessa said, it's so nice to see all the different languages as well in the greetings. I'm just going to pull up our slides here. I had them up and then I moved the slides at the very last moment. So just give me one moment here. There we go. Okay, cool. Well, Vanessa and I are really excited for this. We're so excited, and I'm excited that so many of you have joined, and it also really shows that this topic of burnout is such a necessary conversation to be having. And there's a part of me that's almost like not excited that so many of you were wanting to dive into this. But I really hope that today can be a gentle and safe and nurturing place to explore burnout through a lens that is maybe not always talked about. So before we dive in, I'm going to zip through this land acknowledgement slide because Vanessa and I both do this in our introductions anyway. So I'll start off by introducing myself in my traditional language. Bujuanin, Ariana Indigenous, Nindonji, Amjanong First Nation, Makwa Nindodem, Ninshigo Daya, Unceded Coast Salish, Nababamidis. And so what I said there was, hello, good morning. My name is Ariana, and I'm a mixed heritage woman. So on my mother's side, my family comes from the Aamjiwnaang First Nation in so-called Ontario. And on my father's side, my family comes from Methoni in Greece. And today I'm incredibly humbled and honored and grateful to be tuning in as an uninvited guest on the traditional and stolen territories of the Hul'qumi'num and Tsimshian speaking peoples on what's colonially known as Salt Spring Island. And this island, it's a very special island. There are many nations, many communities who have lived with, worked with, walked with these lands and continue to do so. I believe today there are 14 nations, if I were to do a full proper land acknowledgement, that I would name. And I think it really speaks to the richness and biodiversity of the lands that I have the privilege of walking on. And every day I continue to reflect on what it means to walk gently on these lands and how I can be a good guest. And I'm one of the co-founders of Decolonize and Rize alongside my business partner here, Vanessa. And we offer decolonial facilitation, workshops, trainings to organizations of all shapes and sizes. And we also offer an Indigenous well-being series, which is kind of what today's circle is based off of a little bit. And so I'll pass it over to Vanessa to introduce herself.
Merci, Ariana. Tanche Kiawao. Hello, how is everyone? And welcome to all the 380 now folks we have in our very large virtual circle today. So really happy to be here and spend the next 90 minutes together in this virtual circle. My name is Vanessa Lesperance. I am a mixed heritage woman. I am European settler on my dad's side, proud Red River Métis on my mom's paternal side, and a citizen of Manitoba Métis Federation. I have been on a journey of reclaiming my Métis heritage because it's something I wasn't raised with. And along the journey, part of my reclamation journey was in doing my master's degree, master's in leadership. And I wanted to look at decolonizing the workplace through workplace spirituality because I wanted to see what could the impact be if we brought our whole selves to work, mind, body, emotion, and spirit. Because as probably most people know here, and one of the teachings of the medicine wheel is to have complete holistic well-being, we need to live in balance. And that's mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And in our Western colonial society, we are often expected to only bring our bodies and our minds to work, or our bodies and minds to school, and cut ourselves off emotionally and spiritually. And one of my questions I have is how does that impact our collective well-being as a society? So if we start to look at ourselves and understand ourselves as whole human beings, and we're more than just our bodies, more than just our mind, how could that start to affect positive collective change in our society? So this topic is really near and dear to me because I see how in our colonial capitalistic society, the expectation is to do more, work more, be connected 24/7, and it's not sustainable. So, as Ariana said, this topic I think is so unfortunately really relevant to many of us. Um, and I'm also the co-founder of Decolonize and Rize. I also am an instructor at the Justice Institute of BC, teaching a course on power and privilege, and also in their Center of Leadership, and a bunch of other things I do that I won't bore all of you with today. But I will mention that I'm joining you all today from the traditional, ancestral, and stolen territory of Kakite First Nation, also known as New Westminster. And as a form of language reclamation, I'll share, in case folks don't know, that Kakite means resting place. And so it's my hope today that in this 90 minutes, we can lay to rest our huge to-do lists, lay to rest anything that's filling our minds, so we can just be present. Not often do we give ourselves permission just to be present and let go of our huge to-do lists, which contributes to burnout. So again, as much as we all can, if we can just lay that to rest for now, put all that stuff down so we can lean in, really engage with one another, engage in the chat, and hopefully receive some tools to add to your bundle. So gratitude to the Kakite Nation for being good stewards here since time immemorial. And Ariana, I'll pass back to you.
Beautiful. Miigwech, Vanessa. So, a lot of you are already a little ahead of the game, which I love. You've started to share where you're tuning in from. I love seeing all of the different territories and regions. And Vanessa and I, we love to start every workshop that we do with a visual check-in. And this is an opportunity not only for us to see where folks who are in our virtual rooms are at, but also for you to pause and take a moment and just check in with yourself and maybe ask yourself for the first time in the day, how am I feeling in this moment? And I think we have a really fun way of doing this. So on our slide here, you're going to see a number of, today our animal of choice is dogs. So on a scale of 1 to dog, which dog or dogs represent how you're feeling today? And you know, it might be a couple that are seemingly conflicting because we're complex human beings. All right, I'm seeing lots of fours. Yeah, it is a vibe today. 1 or 4. Vanessa, how are you feeling?
We'll get to this later today, but four was definitely me the past few months. But I'm actually feeling like a two right now. I just love the look on that pup's face, looking happy, maybe inquisitive, and just looking forward to today in the circle. So I would say I'm a two, but I was definitely a four,
Yeah.
four and a one. What about you?
I'm feeling a six. I'm just so excited that there's so many people on here. And I feel like today is my last, it's been a really busy few months. And today is like the last of it. And I feel like things settle down a little bit for the holidays. So I'm really excited about that too. Yeah, seeing lots of fours, lots of different numbers here in the chat, but four seems to be the most common. Four, five, three, and all at once. Yeah, I mean, four and three, they can go hand in hand for sure. All right, so if you haven't had an opportunity, sorry, go ahead, Vanessa.
No, I was going to say if you're a four, it's no surprise why you'd be at a session on burnout prevention and mitigation. So
Hmm.
yeah, we got your back and we see you and we feel you.
Yes, 100%. All right, so you can keep popping those into the chat if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, and we're going to continue on here. Um, no, we're in the right spot. Vanessa, do you want to take the lead on this one here?
Hey,
Our
should
agenda
you?
is not fully in line with our slides, apparently.
Don't we just love Mercury in retrograde?
It's great.
Um, so we would be remiss to, if we're in a circle to talk about burnout, we would be remiss to not acknowledge and inviting you to remember to honor your needs. So even though the invitation is to put down your huge to-do lists, sometimes things might call our attention. So please take care of what you need, especially for your own well-being for the next 90 minutes. The beautiful thing about being a webinar is maybe you're just going to have your screen off and just listen and just give your eyes a break from the screen. Maybe that's will be nourishing to you. Maybe you grab and make a cup of tea during our session. Maybe grab a blanket if you're working from home. Just do what you need to be comfortable, cozy, and settled. Gratitude to Serene and the UBC team for also providing emotional support services too. So if something starts to feel activating, please ensure that you're taking care of your well-being during this session. Ariane and I can't see you, so it's hard for us to gauge people's expressions. So we'll trust that you are going to do what you need just to feel settled and nourished during this time together. Okay, so that leads us to why are we here? Well, as expected and as we alluded to, in our Western society, thanks to capitalism, there's uh, an expectation to always be plugged in, to do more, work more, and especially with access to our devices, it's so easy to be plugged into work 24/7, let alone our personal lives, our family lives, our community. So the tendency for burnout is so huge. And before I became self-employed, I was working at corporations and organizations. The huge focus for HR was talking about mental health and burnout in the workplace and how it's really on the rise. It's skyrocketing. And this is just simply not sustainable. Um, and it's not sustainable to keep going like this. And this is a reminder that we as humans developed and designed these systems. And so as humans, we can choose to either uphold these systems or choose a new and different way of operating. And we would like to invite a decolonized way of being and operating. So just as humans design the systems we're in, we as humans can design new systems that serve us and serve our collective well-being, and respect and honor who we are as human beings first, rather than human doings. So this is a reminder that we all have the power to enact that change and choose what we want to uphold and choose how we want to show up differently for ourselves and each other. And also a reminder is when we all take accountability for our well-being, set proper and healthy boundaries to avoid burnout. If we each do that, not only will that benefit us as individuals, that will start to benefit the collective. So taking responsibility for our own care, our own healing, our own well-being gives others permission to do the same. And this is how we start to create that ripple, right? And start to influence change throughout our society. So it's our hope in our time together that we're going to just normalize talking about how our society lends itself to burnout culture, what it looks like, but also again provide tools to add to your bundle, to your well-being bundle. What are identifying what your medicines are, so we can start to collectively choose how we want to show up and ask ourselves, is this what we want to uphold, or do we want to uphold something else? So that is why we're here, and a little bit of what to expect today. All right. So before I pass over to Ariana for a brief teach, we're going to take you to school. And considering this is part of UBC, this is, I guess, appropriate for a little pop quiz. So using the chat, um, we're going to ask true or false. We're going to ask a few of these questions, and then we'll unpack the answers. True or false? Burnout impacts 40% of people in the US. So using the chat, do you think that's true or do you think that's false? And it's going to scroll down to the chat so I can see your answers. True, true. I'm seeing a mix. So it's looking like a 50-50. It's actually false. Burnout impacts 77% of adults in the US. And this is done by a Deloitte survey. Yeah, I'm seeing some surprise emojis. And folks, I'm loving these emojis. So thanks for doing that, because it's giving us a sense that people are there and paying attention. But yeah, the shock faces, for sure. So again, this is really indicative that this is like an epidemic, this culture of burnout, stress, overwhelm, and mental health decline, 77%. So it goes to show how paramount this is. And if it's 77% of the US, it's safe to assume the same in so-called Canada. Okay, next question. Burnout is a sign of weakness or a person's inability to handle stress. True or false? I'm seeing lots of falses. Someone in caps, false. Okay, you're great students here. You're absolutely right. It is false. In fact, it's something Ariana always says. Burnout can actually can take greater tolls on folks who are really like type A, really ambitious, really have a high tolerance for stress, because their fuse is so long. That stress accumulates until the point where they hit a wall, which leads to even greater burnout because they ignore the warning signs. So actually, folks with high tendencies to handle stress face burnout on deeper levels, and in no way is it a sign of weakness. We're human beings, not human doings, right? So we're not expected to work as like robots. Okay, next pop quiz question. True or false? Burnout can take years to recover from. So true or false? Yeah, everyone's getting A plus plus in this pop quiz. It's true. So burnout can take weeks up to years. And I know several Indigenous women entrepreneurs that I know, they're coming to mind, who work so hard, so tirelessly, that they've just been in a constant state of burnout that they've been trying to climb out of. This is why it's so important that we start to listen to the warning signs, because the longer we take to ignore, the longer we ignore them, the longer it takes for us to recover. So this is why it's so important we start to talk about this and look at the signs. Okay, true or false? There isn't anything I can do to speed up recovery or prevent burnout. True or false? Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, I'm seeing all the falses come up. That is absolutely false. So we can all be proactive in preventing burnout or equip ourselves to recover from it. So it's definitely within our control. And that's part of the reason why we're here today to talk about prevention and then also recovery. And we want to make sure to hear from you too. So it's not Ariane and I don't claim to be the experts and hold all the knowledge. We know there's so much wisdom in this room too. So we'll definitely be asking you your ideas and what you do, your tools, your strategies later on.
All right. Thanks for that, Vanessa. So it almost feels a little bit silly to go into these next few slides. I know that through the UBC Learning Circle, I imagine there's probably lots of students, lots of folks in academia. I think we were told there was lots of folks who work in healthcare, and I'm sure there are people from a wide variety of professions and um, and lives. And so it almost feels silly to talk about like what is burnout, because I feel like it's not something that even really needs to be explained. But just in case, that so that we can all kind of have a common ground of where we're coming at burnout from today. The definition of burnout that we use for this specific workshop is that burnout is a state of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion as a result of chronic stress. And I feel as though that statement of chronic stress, it doesn't fully encompass everything, right? Vanessa has spoken a few times about the colonial capitalist society that we exist within that constantly demands more growth, more productivity, more output from us. So we have these demands placed upon us from work, from our academic lives. We're also trying to do things that historically have been done with a village, and we're trying to do those without a village. We are living in an age where there is constant stimulation and constant connectivity from our phones. We have environmental toxins, we have polluted waters, we have polluted airs. A lot of us are deficient in much of the nutrients that we need, either because we are utilizing processed foods out of necessity because we don't have the time and capacity to home cook everything from scratch, or it's not accessible, or simply because the soil that our foods are grown in are nutrient devoid. So chronic stress is not just like, oh, I've got too much on my to-do list. Chronic stress really is this systemic factor that influences so much of our environment. And then when we look at, when we look specifically at Indigenous folks who are existing within a colonial society that, colonialism is still alive and happening today. It's not something that was in the past. To still be navigating systems that are designed to be against you is a whole other layer of, I don't even want to call it stress because that doesn't encompass it. It's trauma. It impacts all layers of one's being and the community and ultimately the collective's being. Now, Vanessa has put together this wonderful little side-by-side here. So I'm going to pass it back to Vanessa to kind of give us an overview on some of the differences of worldviews and how they can contribute to burnout culture.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ariana. And looking at the chat, something that Miranda Quay said that stood out to me is Miranda said, decolonizing demands cultural views and solutions to cope and resist oppression. Boom. That's like the quote of the day. And so, talking about that decolonizing and using cultural views, I want to offer this side by side because it's by design that burnout is so paramount in our society. And I'm going to read a list on the left-hand side, which represents the dominant culture we live in or a Western culture we live in. And as I go through this, maybe you want to have your eyes closed or just identify what resonates with you, identify which you have experience with, because I can tell you, I can assure you, I can relate to everything on the left-hand side, especially when I used to work in corporate environments. So I'm going to read the left-hand side, see what resonates, what stands out, what you feel is familiar to you. And then I'm going to read stuff on the right-hand side, which encompasses an Indigenous worldview or relational worldview. And this is how we can start to counter a demanding culture that demands burnout and demands us to do more and more. Okay, so as I go through the list, see which resonates with you, see which like really you feel like in your bones. All right, so busyness is a badge of honor. I've definitely been there. Your position and title and salary is an indicator of success. Scarcity or fear is a motivator, meaning, oh, if I don't put in those extra hours, if I don't work through my holidays, or if I take my holidays, I'm going to be in jeopardy of losing my job. My boss will get mad at me. Da 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 da. Uh, Respect and personal value is achieved through hard work. Expectation to put work first. Rest, slow pace, strong work boundaries are frowned upon. And competition is a tool used to dominate or win, and sometimes win at all costs. So just as I read that list, just sit, reflect, see what you have experience with, see what feels familiar to you, and just sense how it's feeling in your body. To me, it makes me feel tense. And I would love to hear in the chat, like looking at that list, how folks are feeling. To me, it makes me feel tense, but it also makes me feel it's familiar. I know this feeling. This is characteristic of a colonial Western society, thanks to capitalism. But let's look at what the alternative is. Because again, humans designed the systems we lived in, and us as humans, we can reclaim Indigenous worldviews. We can reclaim that connection, that deep connection to self, others, and the land. And that reconnection, no matter who you are, whether you're Indigenous or a settler, if you go back far enough in your ancestry, it's a remembering of that deep connection to self, others, and the land. So let's compare Western or dominant worldview to Indigenous or relational worldview. So instead of busyness being a badge of honor, busyness is seen as a form of distraction and escapism from addressing what's real and things that we need to work through, maybe our own inner healing. Contribution to community and personal character and values is an indicator of success. So it's not based on how much money we make, it's not based on the title we hold. It's about how we give back to community and who we are, the integrity we hold, the values we hold as people. Communal care as a motivator for hard work rather than scarcity or fear mindset. So giving back to community, making sure others are taken care of. Respect and personal value is inherent and given to all. So it's not something we have to work for. It's not something that we have to prove. It's just a given. It's acknowledgement that we as humans, we all have worth and we all have value. And it's not something we have to strive towards. The expectation is to put family, community, and well-being first, and then comes work, right? So right now our priorities are shifted. Rest, slow pace, and strong work boundaries are encouraged. And then lastly, competition, instead of winning at all costs, competition is used for personal development and to find our growth edge. As I read that list, just sense how that feels in your body. And to me, it feels like, oh, I can sigh. I can just like, oh, I can just be. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to strive towards anything. It's just a matter of being connected to who I am as a person, and then sharing my gifts, my medicines with the world. Um, so I'm just going to check the chat here and see what folks are sharing. Um, Sonia says very familiar on the left side. Yeah, very familiar. Um, Jody says makes me feel I'm on the right path and changing these ways of thinking. Uh, yeah, the feelings coming up for some folks. Alicia says anxious, angered, sad, and familiarity on the left-hand side. Totally. Um, and then on the right-hand side, it feels comfortable. It's acceptance, strong longing. I can breathe. Yeah. So this is an invitation. This is accessible to all of us, right? So we can either choose to maintain and uphold the left-hand side, or we can choose to engage on the right-hand side, which is steeped in Indigenous ways, knowing and being, and coming from a very decolonized lens. So this is my invitation for all of us to step into the right-hand side, coming from an Indigenous worldview. Ariana, back to you.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the chat here and seeing what everyone is sharing. And I see a comment from Tara, I believe, of many don't know that the right side is an option. They're stuck on the left. And yeah, when you think of these oppressive systems that we exist and operate within, it can almost seem like, how do we do that on the right side, right? Like how do we choose a new way of doing and being? But I wonder what would happen if all of us collectively started to step up and to push back against the systems. If if all of us recognized our inherent right to rest, if we all started to appreciate that different brains and different bodies work at different paces and have different requirements. And I really do believe that change, it starts from within and it can ripple out. So I'm grateful to each and every one of you who are here, all 437 of you, because wow, think of the ripple that can come from this. So I'll continue on here. Now, this is just kind of from a work or school perspective, but burnout, it can be characterized by three dimensions. One of them being exhaustion, and we'll look at that. Sorry, I'm just looking. Okay, it's not. I don't think there's anything wrong with our slides. Please jump in and let me know if there's an issue with our slides on our end. We'll go into what exhaustion actually is and how it's not just being tired. It's also characterized by reduced work efficiency and work-related cynicism. So first, I want to look at some ways that organizations can burn out. So a lot of the time, Vanessa and I, we do most of our work internally at organizations, large corporations, smaller nonprofits. And when we talk about burnout, like we can think of an organization like an organism. And an organism is made up of many different cells, and they all have their different parts and roles to play. And usually if something's up with the environment around the organization or the organism, it's going to impact the organism itself and all of the cells. On the other side of that, if there's something going on with one of the cells in the organism, that can trickle out and impact things as well. So if we're looking at burnout through an organizational level, I'm not going to go through every single one of these here. We will send out the recording, so you'll be able to come back and look, but I don't want to read off of a slide to you for, 10, 15 minutes. But some of the things that we hear and witness in a lot of companies, especially today, is that there's an increased pressure to do more but often without additional resources. So the workload is increasing, and the people to get the workload done does not increase. And oftentimes, in many cases, especially right now, the number of people is actually decreasing. Something else, I have a friend who's doing some really good, important work around this in the world of workplace well-being, is this like kind of lip service talk about well-being in the workplace, but not really followed through with anything actionable or tangible. You know, we might hear managers and folks within the organization saying, yeah, you know, we don't expect you to be on at all times. And yet an email comes through at 10 p.m. demanding a response right away. So, you know, there's a lot of like emphasis on what the individual needs to do in order to prevent burnout without actually changing anything within the work environment or within the workplace culture to actually make it easier for that person to focus on their well-being. Essentially, the organization kind of removes their responsibility. But when we look at burnout through an individual lens, I think it's important to look at a lot of these different characteristics because sometimes we might experience things that are seemingly strange or mysterious symptoms, and we don't really know what they're caused from or where they're coming from. Gosh, the number of hours I've spent in doctor's offices and getting blood work and doing all of the things to figure out what's wrong with me only to realize that I'm just dealing with massive amounts of stress in my being. It's laughable almost. So some of the things that we can experience, you know, this like wired but tired feeling where like you wake up and all you can think about is being able to go to bed at the end of the day, and you drag yourself through your full day, and then it's finally time to go to bed, and your brain is just on fire. It's thinking about all of the things, and you just can't get yourself to fall asleep. Um, a lot of syndromes that folks are diagnosed with these days. Syndromes are really a collection of different symptoms that don't necessarily, or the medical model has not been able to tie back to a specific root cause. It's almost a bit of an easier way of saying we don't actually know what's going on, but it kind of looks like this, so we're just going to lump it all together. On our mental level, burnout can look like difficulty focusing or brain fog, and it can be like accompanied almost by the state of like being indifferent, having a bit of a negative outlook on things. I always know for myself, if I start to find myself not caring about the outcome of my work, that's an indicator to me that burnout is imminent. I'm maybe not there yet, but that it's on the horizon. Emotionally, we might be experiencing apathy. Does this even matter? Does any of the work I'm doing make a difference? It might show up as depression, feelings of guilt and shame. And spiritually, it can show up as disconnection. So, disconnection from self, disconnection, or a desire to isolate or withdraw from our support systems, our communities, our families, those who we love and trust. And it can be hard to see the bigger picture, to be able to kind of come out of the tunnel that we're in for the moment and see the broader picture at play here. I'm just going to go into the chat and see what folks are saying here. Do you need to experience all four categories at once to be in burnout? You know, that's a good question. I imagine that under, like, if we were to look at things through more of a colonial lens, there would be like boxes that you have to tick. And if you haven't ticked all of the boxes, then you're not in a state of burnout. But I view it as a spectrum, right? Like I've said, even for me, if I'm noticing, like my first cues are usually the mind stuff. So for me, it's like the brain fog. I get really overwhelmed. Like thinking about what to make for dinner is just like, the most challenging decision ever. And those tell me that like I'm doing too much. I'm maybe not in that state of collapse yet, but it's like I'm here and I can see it over there. So it's a sign for me that I need to make some changes first. Yeah, I see Joe saying my mind and body feel this first or feel this first. Yeah.
And
I'm seeing, sorry, go ahead, Vanessa.
no, no, finish your thought, Ariana.
I was just going to point out here what Miranda's comment in the chat as well of lateral violence in Indigenous communities, and led by deeply colonial people also add the isolation and feeling unvalued as genocidal systems treat us 100%.
And going back to the question of do you need to feel all four? Well, the thing is, again, as the medicine wheel teaches, everything's interconnected, right? So maybe you're not noticing the symptoms, but that stress is going to carry through all parts of our being. So mind, body, emotion, spirit, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. And because our bodies are intelligent, my guess is most folks are familiar with the vagus nerve, right? That connects our brain to our tummy, and so because we have that essentially a second brain in our stomach, we might have physical cues in our body that indicate stress or, feelings of not being well before we're cognizantly aware of it. And my partner might not appreciate me sharing this, but for the past while, he's been having like lots of digestive challenges. And when I asked him, like, how are you feeling? He's like, oh, I'm fine. But like his body are giving him cues otherwise. And because I like to pretend I'm a psychologist, I'm like, I think your body might be telling you something, right? Indicating, and with, lack of appetite and all these things. So, chances are there might be cues, but if if we're in a heightened state of stress or overwhelm or burnout, we might feel a little disconnected from our mind or even our emotions, and that state of apathy or state of freeze if we're looking at nervous system responses. But chances are it will impact all four domains of our being, but we might not be consciously aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So I've seen a lot in the chat here, and a lot of conversations of how this is resonant and um, feelings, feeling sad, feeling angry, feeling anxious about reflecting on this and how resonant it feels. And so I want to just invite us to pause and take a breath. Maybe you can even bring your gaze away from your computer screen. If you've got a window to look out of, that might be nice. Maybe there's a spot in your room or at your desk that's nice, or maybe it even just feels good to close your eyes for a moment. Just taking a few nice deep breaths. If there are any parts of the body that are feeling tight, that are feeling constricted, that are feeling a little bit tender or a little bit anxious, this might seem a little bit abstract, but maybe we can even try to direct some breath into those places. Maybe letting yourself soften just a little bit more and relax with every breath out. And also honoring the intelligence of the body and honoring those places that don't want to soften and relax. We hear you, body, and we trust you. And so as you're continuing to take a few nice slow breaths here, looking out your window or looking at your nice place in your room, a lot of you have already answered some of these questions, but we just have some reflection prompts, and you can either keep these to yourself or you can share them in the chat. Yeah, virtual smudge. So does this resonate with you? And if so, how does burnout show up for you? And this can be a little bit vulnerable because there are 150,000% systemic factors at play. And sometimes we can also get in the way of setting our own boundaries or not upholding the boundaries. And, maybe there's an invitation to ask, what gets in the way of me setting boundaries? What gets in the way of me upholding them? So we'll let folks take some time to pop into the chat here. And Vanessa, oops. I think it's only fair if we are also vulnerable. And I'd love to hear from you around this piece around, burnout and vulnerability and boundaries. Like, what comes up for you on this?
Mhm. As we're talking about this and just seeing people's comments in the chat, I just want to remind us all just to show up with kindness and compassion for ourselves. Because even though mentally we might know this, knowing it and living it are two different things. So, for example, being the co-founder of Decolonize and Rize and talking about, decolonizing well-being and burnout. I know all these things, and yet that didn't stop me not that long ago from stepping into deep burnout. And so the invitation is for to all of us is if you're noticing that, to aim to make those periods of intensity or burnout shorter so you can start to recover. The past few months were really intense for me. And like working 12, 14-hour days consistently, letting go of my own needs, well-being, and having really soft boundaries. And the motivator for that is I was working on this project, and I know my colleague, they were also just really committed and just putting in long hours. I'm like, I can't abandon them like that. That's how I felt. So I felt, okay, this is my responsibility. I said I was going to take on this work. I did. I'm going to show up in a good way. I'm going to complete it and also show support to my colleague who I really admire and respect. And so we were in it together. Um, but the little wins, and it's important that we all have celebrate little wins. So even though I allowed myself to enter in this state of burnout, during that time, other folks were coming to me with different work opportunities. And so that's when I started to set boundaries and I started to say no to work. And that's so empowering. So if any of you have difficulties setting those boundaries of saying no, getting in that habit is so important. And we can say no in a good way. It doesn't have to be like, no, screw off. We can be kind and compassionate in how we say no. So to me, that was a small win to say no to outside work because I knew that period of time is going to be intense. Um, and I was traveling for work during this time. And when I came back home, I just sobbed because I was carrying a lot of stuff, both personally and professionally. And I sobbed and I just had to just release it and let it go. And since then, I've really been really focused on my well-being, and knowing in retrospect that kind of intensity is not something I want to enter again. So again, I'm taking that as a small win to say, okay, I knew it was going to be intense. I didn't know it was going to be that wild. But now going forward, that's not something I want to continue doing. So again, this is an invitation to all of us to be kind of compassionate, even when we start to enter into burnout, even though we might know better and our minds might know better. Um, what are some small wins we can do? And then also, how can we start to come back to ourselves, recoup after burnout? And then what are the lessons learned from that so we don't keep repeating that pattern? And I'll just share something I really admire about working with Ariana as a business partner. Ariana, you might not feel this way, but I really respect and admire the fact that you have really clear boundaries and say, these are my work days, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, these are my work days. The other time is for my family and for community. And so sharing that up front, I think is such a great way to start to disrupt these colonial capitalist systems, like sharing up front, what are my boundaries? What am I willing to do? And how can I ensure that giving myself balance in my life? Because I know for me, during the fall, there was no balance. So how can we ensure that to maintain that balance? So that's a little bit about my story. What
Mm,
about you, Ariana?
yeah, it's interesting hearing your reflection on your appreciation of my boundaries because a lot of the time I still feel guilty for them. It's still hard for me to say these are my 3 work days because the other days, and all of the hours outside of those work days are for my unpaid labor of being a mother. Um, but those boundaries have become a lot stronger because of my experience with burnout. I struggled with substance abuse for a decade. And when I got sober in 2012, I didn't realize it at the time, but I thought that just taking alcohol and drugs out of my life was enough. I thought that, okay, cool, I've done the work. Um, and I spent the next, when was it? So it was 2017. I spent the next 5 years essentially avoiding everything that I avoided with the use of drugs and alcohol with fitness goals. So running, racing, doing triathlons, half marathons, spending hours in the gym all of the time, working a full-time job while building a business, being active in the community. And these were, of course, things that had positives, and I received a lot from them, and they were really integral in my recovery journey. And I like to joke that I just literally continued to run away from all of my problems until my body said no more in 2017. And I got to the point where I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't get up, I couldn't do anything. And I was forced to sit with all of the parts of myself that I had avoided through a decade of substance abuse, plus 5 years of fueling that addiction through other means. And it really changed how I move through the world. Sometimes as a self-employed individual, money's tight, especially with the daughter. I like get kind of like, oh, do I need to get a job? And I just like, I can't. I can't go back into that kind of environment. Like I feel like I've built such strong boundaries around my time and what I'm willing to do and not willing to do. And it sometimes I think makes things a little harder than they need to be, but also allows me to find ways to make a living and provide for myself through my business in a way that honors my needs and my body. I got a sensitive little body. I just like, I can't participate in this world in the way that's expected. And I sometimes get really down on myself for that. I think of how I used to be able to do all of the things and how my capacity seems so much lower, but it actually feels like my capacity is a human capacity and not the superhuman capacity that I used to strive for and could actually do for a number of years until I couldn't anymore. So that's a little bit about my story. And I just want to go through, there's so many incredible comments here. I wish I could go through and read through every single piece. Um, but I'm just seeing some folks say that when burnout shows up, you feel disconnected, alone, don't want to engage. Yeah, that isolation. Joanna says, I now engage in a drumming class and a dance class. Yes, moving the body, getting that feeling of the heartbeat. Learning that no is a complete sentence. Yes. Vanessa, anything you're seeing that you want to pull out and really highlight here?
Actually, one thing in case folks missed it, is Kira shared again. UBC Learning Circle has lots of counseling resources and supports. So I just want to make sure to call attention to that in case folks need. I'm going to just reshare what Kira put in the chat so it's accessible. Um, but it seems like, looking at the chat, it's sadly this is so relatable, right? And everyone seems like has their own story or version of their own experiences of burnout. And so again, I just want to remind us all to be just kind of compassionate with ourselves and with one another. Be mindful of the things that we need to recover, and then remind us to start to make um, different choices in service of ourselves because we have that power to do that. So just a reminder of the power within that we all have
Mhm. Yeah. I'm glad that we're all here together today.
in our big virtual circle.
Yeah. And so before I pass it back to Vanessa, one other piece that I feel is important to draw attention to is how Indigenous folks in the workplace, in academia, in the community carry an additional load that can contribute to even, beyond burnout, just the trauma of existing within these societies. All of the factors of colonialism aside, what we often hear from a lot of Indigenous folks working within corporate or in different work environments is the additional unpaid load that they carry simply because they're Indigenous. The expectation to be the person to do the land acknowledgement, um, to educate around the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, to share their own families' experiences, to participate in tokenized ways. And there's an invitation for our non-Indigenous friends and allies on the call here to reflect on, where might you be unknowingly adding to the load of your Indigenous team members? And, this expands out beyond Indigenous folks and people in all marginalized communities as well. It's really important for us to reflect on how we relate to one another, how we engage with one another, and can we maybe use our own voice and our own privilege if we witness somebody being tokenized in the workplace so they don't also have to take on that load of being like, hey, here's my boundary. I'm not doing the land acknowledgement today. So I want to offer this as a really important reminder because that is a very practical, within reach way that we can support our Indigenous colleagues, fellow students, coworkers, and folks in our community. All right, Vanessa, back to you.
All right. So we want to talk about how do we mitigate burnout? Now, these are just some ideas, but we would also love to hear from folks in the chat because I know there's so much collective wisdom here. So these are some things that are kind of like, standard best practices, but again, we would love to hear from you. But some ideas to mitigate burnout from an organizational level, like from a workplace level, especially if you're in management, senior levels of management, these are things to really be mindful of, to be intentional to interweave in the workplace, but it includes nurturing supportive relationships, um, any kind of I forget, I think it's bell hooks that says healing is an act of communal care. And so healing is done in community. And so this is why supportive relationships are so important. And I did see in this chat, some people are saying, communal care can be exhausting. Or I saw one person say, I work for my nation and I give so much and I have an empty cup essentially. And so it's a reminder that this should be reciprocal, right? So communal care can't just be one way, and otherwise it's not really communal, right? It should be a two-way street. So this is why it's important that we all commit to this because we need each other to support each other and to fill each other's cup. And this is why it's great working with Ariana, because when I have more capacity, I can do more, allowing her to take a step back and vice versa. And so we're able to do that really well and to respect each other's needs and where we're at. But so nurturing supportive relationships, Having meaningful recognition programs. So, letting folks know that they're being seen for their contributions, rather than it being taken for granted. Doing team building to nurture those supportive relationships, celebrating our successes and our wins. I know, especially as Indigenous folks, there could be a tendency to be humble, not talk about, our successes, our accomplishments. That's another way to be just seen and be in reciprocity, build those relationships to say, hey, like I did this. I'm really excited about this. And there's nothing wrong with that, being proud of our accomplishments and taking time to celebrate that. Um, and actively working at decolonizing your work environment. Yes, here for that. All about decolonizing the workplace. Next slide, Ariana. And again, just being mindful of the load you place on team members. And again, not putting extra undue emotional burden or expectation on your Indigenous team members. Google exists for a reason, so taking accountability for your own learning, rather than putting that extra burden. And it's not just Indigenous team members, it could be queer team members, trans, Black, disabled, whatever communities folks represent in your workplace. Again, making sure you don't put undue or additional labor on them. Um, Being earnest, keeping conversations real in the workplace and talking about challenges in a real way, making sure there's time for rest, limiting communication outside of work hours, encouraging boundaries. We're going to look at that a bit, and offering accountability for self-care. So it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually ensure it's reinforced. And then at the individual level, finding balance. That period in the fall where I said it was wild, a friend of mine, Afro-Indigenous man, he was like, Vanessa, how's your balance? And I said, it's non-existent. So just always checking in with ourselves and finding, where am I in balance? And if not, where is it coming off kilter? Creating a plan and prioritizing self-care. So having that plan available before you actually start to enter and feel the effects of stress and burnouts. Being more mindful, remembering ourselves that burnout is not a badge of honor, and starting to unlearn colonial conditioning ideals and standards. So going back to that table, showing the Western worldview, Indigenous worldview. Learning to be vulnerable, which fosters deep and meaningful connections with one another. Asking for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Be intentional about blocking time in your calendar so it can't be full back to back to back to back, but actually giving your time that intentional time for space. Um, and even turning on your out of office notification for one additional day when you get back from vacation, because often we're drowning in emails. So actually making sure that people know that you aren't actually available your first day back, because it's allowing you a gentle landing and a gentle arrival back to the workplace after vacation. And I just want to look at the chat here. Uh, Stacy says, have mental health day per month for employees. I love that. Um, Joe says, I host weekly drum circles and art programs, lifts me as well as attendees. Yeah, that's so good. We need a mental health day every week. Yeah, even better than once a month. Group art therapy for team. Beautiful. Love that. Um, uh, not having employees explain why they're taking a sick day or wellness leave day. Yeah, totally. Um, Simone says, I'll do a little dance when I achieve something I've been working on. I love that. Doing little dances to celebrate your wins. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing all these. And I hope folks are getting these. And I hope you can have an option here. I don't know if people have an option to save the chat as participants, but this might be a great resource for folks to come back to as well. Okay, so this is we're going to give you a few minutes to really reflect and go inwards. And, we talk about setting boundaries as if it's an easy thing. People are like, oh, just set healthy boundaries. Okay, great. It's, um, there could be a lot of barriers and real barriers, a lot of fears and apprehensions when it comes to setting boundaries. So we want to give you some time right now, just a few minutes. And if you have pen and paper nearby, you can grab it, or if you prefer a digital notepad, you can type it out. But we're just going to give you a few minutes to really deeply think on these things and either think about your answer or write it out, whatever you prefer. We'll hopefully play some ambient music in the background. We might have some tech issues with that, but we'll see. But the questions we want you to think about is we all know that boundaries are good, da 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 da. However, what's really important, something we often don't ask ourselves, are what are the boundaries we're too afraid to set to prevent burnout? And these could be real fears, right? It could be fear of losing your job. It could be fear of not being good enough. It could be all of these deep-seated things that activate us. So we just want you to pay attention to think about what are the boundaries that you know you need to set, but you're too afraid to do it. And then second question is, what are the boundaries I can strengthen and uphold? So we're all about like little baby steps. So small wins accumulate to bigger wins. So what are the big boundaries? But of the boundaries that you do feel comfortable, what do you feel comfortable strengthening and upholding? And then what's something that's really accessible? What's something that's really low risk that you're like, okay, this is what I can start to set now in order to take control of my well-being and start to prevent burnout and step into a decolonized way of being. So we'll just give you a few minutes again for reflection or for journaling, and we're going to just play some ambient music in the background. We hope that that was a time just to sit with yourself and reflect. It wasn't a ton of time, but often we don't give ourselves the time or the space to sit with this and really be intentional about our boundaries, what's coming up for us, about what might prevent us from setting boundaries, and how we can do something that's low risk, low barrier, so we start to get into habits. Um, Again, because it can't just be on select few, the helpers who are always giving, right? This needs to be a collective communal experience where we're all committed to changing these systems, to shifting from human doings to human beings. And so this truly needs to be a collective effort. And that's why when I take accountability for my well-being and healing, it gives permission for others to do the same. And eventually it spreads, right? And becomes a societal thing. So by all of us being here today, it's my hope that we start to be that change, to influence these systems and start to decolonize a system that isn't designed for our holistic well-being. Feel free to share in the chat if anything came up for you during the exercise. Facilitator in me wants to hear from folks and engage and talk, so it feels a little, it's just one-sided just hearing us talk, but we love seeing the participation in the chat.
Yeah, it's great seeing the chat bumping. This is so different from how we usually do it, though.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So yes, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I see a low risk boundary here of do not work during lunchtime. Yes, so good. Um, we didn't have time to go through this today, but lucky for you, we do have a little free well-being guide that we will link to at the end. And we have this practice of creating your own medicine bundle or medicine wheel, along with a few others that can be really supportive. And those will be in a free well-being practices guide that we'll share a link to as well. But, this is just to collect or return to the tools that you know support all layers of your being. And what you might even start to notice is that if there's something that shows up in each quadrant that supports your well-being, it's probably a good indicator that that's a great one to create some time and space for. So just as we get ready to wrap it up and move on to the Q&A, Vanessa and I just want to remind you that rest is resistance. Every time we cultivate the courage and we put aside all of the voices that tell us why we have to say yes and why we have to take this on, every time we step into our power and own our no's and own our boundaries, we are ultimately disrupting and dismantling our oppressive systems, colonialism, capitalism, these systems that want to keep us sick, disconnected, exhausted. Every time we choose our own well-being and the well-being of our communities and our families over what the machine asks of us, we are saying no thank you to that.
I'm
Vanessa?
here for the spiciness too and the disruption. Um, and it reminds me to a motivator of me reclaiming my Métis heritage, which wasn't something I was raised with, is also giving like an FU to the colonizers because their goal was for all of us to be separated from our culture, from traditions. And so me reclaiming is an act of resistance. And so all of us taking time to rest is also resistance to this colonial capitalist system. So if you want to be a badass without even intending to be a badass, take time for rest.
Yeah, have a nap.
Have a nap. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm seeing folks mention Trisha. I don't know if it's Hersey or Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance. She's got a card deck as well. Adrienne Marie Brown also has a really great book around this of pleasure activism. I've been working my way through that, and Rest is Resistance is on my list. Sleep equals fight the power. Yeah, because when you're
Mhm.
rested, think of all the things that you are capable of. And we also just want to offer a reminder of progress, not perfection, right? You know, we have generational conditioning around productivity, around lack of boundaries, around how our worth is tied up to our output. This is not something that we just sit and we feel good in a webinar with Vanessa and Ariana with, and now none of that exists in our being, right? I do remember seeing a comment that acknowledges the deep work that accompanies the ability to resist these systems. So we want to encourage gentleness, patience, and that acknowledgement of like those tiny wins. So if you do take a day where you don't work over your lunch break, amazing, celebrate it. Come find us on LinkedIn and tell us, and we'll be like, yay, that's awesome. Or tell a colleague. You know, all of these little pieces, they contribute to the bigger whole, and no action of self-care or prioritizing yourself is too small. So with that, there's two QR codes here on the screen. I feel like it's probably clunky to have them, but I did want to have it just for the recording, and Vanessa will pop the links into the chat as well. The QR code on the left will link to our Simple Wellbeing Practices workbook that will have that medicine bundle activity. It's got a breathing practice, a beautiful spiral activity that Vanessa's been given the permission to share, and a couple of other pieces. So you can sign up for our newsletter and you'll receive that. And then the other QR code is for a public cohort that we're running in January. Normally we work only internally with organizations, but our signature offering, Reconciliation and Wellbeing, will be open to the broader public in January, and we're really excited about that. Camera is not working. Vanessa just popped those links into the chat. I'll copy and paste them down again below
I
if it
got
will
them.
let me. Okay, Vanessa's gonna
Got
pop
it.
them in again. So maybe just add them into your notes pad. Yeah, it's not letting me copy anything. I'll try to grab your email if I can, and then I can send you those links if you don't get them.
And for clarity, the opt-in will give you access to the well-being book that Ariana put a lot of effort in. And so just sitting back, and she developed this beautiful offering. So the opt-in is for the access to the digital well-being book, and it is fillable, so you can either fill it in on your computer or print it, do you prefer?
Yes. Okay, maybe we'll leave this slide up while if folks are wanting to look at this while we do the Q&A, or Serene, would you prefer that we turn slides off? What works best for?
We can keep it on.
Okay.
I'm just gonna kind of make it a little smaller. Yeah, so we are kind of limited for time, so we can't answer all the questions, but we have quite a few here. The one that kind of stood out to me is, do you have any recommendations on how to push for culturally relevant supports for staff so they're budgeted and treated with as much respect as Western supports?
Mm. Um, I mean, I have a thought that's maybe not the most popular, but it's like looking at things through the lens of the colonizer and like,
Yeah,
how does it benefit the organization?
yeah.
And because a lot of the time, that's what most companies want to look at is like, how's this going to impact our bottom line? How's this going to impact productivity? And all of those things. Um, so if there's a way to tie it back to if, absenteeism or retention are issues within the organization, how might these culturally relevant or like cultural well-being benefits in the company or things like that, how might that support the company's bottom line, which just feels so gross to say, but
And yeah, no, I agree. And it's unfortunate, but the fact of the matter is for, non-Indigenous organizations and senior levels of management, it's all about dollars for them. Gross, but that's our reality. Um, and I would also add, when we look to decolonize systems, healthcare, business, whatever it is, it's not only in service for Indigenous folks, even though it is about reclaiming, restoring, and centering Indigenous ways of knowing and being. When we do that, it actually benefits all our relations, like no matter who you are, because it's relational, it's heart-centered, and it's sustainable, and it's life-giving. It's about reconnecting with the land in a good way, making sure their business practices are kind and gentle to the land and rooted in respect for self and others. So it's actually a really, it goes hand in hand if any organizations have EDI initiatives to ensure that, there's a decolonized aspect or lens to it, or bringing that in, because it truly does benefit all people, especially Indigenous folks, that we all benefit when we start to decolonize places and spaces.
The next question is, what are some suggestions on how to set boundaries and support yourself through burnout throughout, or no, through burnout when your team, boss, and everyone around you is working hard and you don't want to appear like you're not pulling your weight?
Hmm. Mhm. That's a great question. And the thing that comes to mind first has a caveat. And the caveat is that when you are in a state of burnout, it's hard to be that like disruptor and that trailblazer. Um, but to be the one on the team that can start to push back in small ways and even get curious and ask a colleague like, hey, how's this working out for you, to really start to bring that into the conversation. Like it needs to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I also hesitate to say that it needs to be the responsibility of the person who is in a state of burnout. So it's a tough lens to come at.
For me, and it's really context specific, and without knowing the person who asked the question and your work environment, the context, for my own experience and from the experience I had not that long ago, I was fortunate in that the burnout I experienced was very project specific. So I knew this was going to be a wild ride for a few months. And after that, things will calm down. And so I knew that, this intense period, this dark period is only going to be, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's when I chose to now address it, right? So all that work is done, that project's wrapped up. Now let's talk about this, right? And that's when I started to set those boundaries. And I don't know if that's helpful for you or others here, because in case your work is just chronically in that state of just doing more and more and more. And if that's the case, then yes, someone has to say step up and step into that leadership and address it, not in an accusatory way, not in a hostile way, but say, hey, this isn't working. Like this isn't going to be sustainable. And we're going to be so much successful as a team, as an organization, or whatever, if we actually start to take care of our well-being and not work at this level of intensity, because no one can sustain that. Um, and a metaphor I like to use, which is kind of funny because I don't watch car racing. I'm not into like that whatsoever. But what I do know to be true of car racing is they go so freaking fast. However, they can't finish the race, let alone win the race, if they don't take the pit stops, right? So these cars were driving so fast, they literally have to stop. And they have a team come around them, change the wheels, put in gas, like all these things to ensure that the driver and the car is supported so they continue going on the race. So if we can treat machines with that level of care, we should be able to treat ourselves with that level of care too.
100%.
Mhm. Our next question is, have you found specific organizational structures that tend to be more prone to employee burnout? Or do you know of a structural system that tend to have better outcomes?
It's a good question. I
I
mean,
can't
Vanessa,
think of any off the top of my head,
I was
but
gonna
I
say,
know professions that tend to be like helping professions, like therapy, social work, teachers. There's a higher level of burnout, right? Because professions inherently about giving. And so it's in those industries that really need to be mindful of that and mitigating that burnout. Because I think people who gravitate to those professions tend to just want to give of themselves. So ensuring that the givers and the helpers are taken care of too, and not taken advantage of.
hmm yeah, and something that comes to mind too, like I said, I've been working for myself or my family for like most of my life. I haven't had a lot of like jobs with other people, but one of the things that we talk about in our decolonizing business circle is around flattening hierarchy as much as possible. And of course, in organizations, there's going to be different levels of leadership, but there's a difference between this like hierarchical, I'm up here, and so you're down here, and your opinion doesn't matter, and having maybe various levels and roles and responsibilities, but where everyone's contribution and thoughts and perspectives are valued. And I feel like if we're looking at a structure of an organization, even one that can acknowledge the validity and the wisdom that is held in every single level of the organization, I think that that could perhaps lead to a better chance of having less burnout in the organization.
Our last two questions. The first one is, do you have a reading list that is from a decolonized lens versus um, a Western lens on burnout? This is from a clinician counselor or clinical counselor. And then
Mm.
the next one, uh, do you offer workshops for your organization? If so, what is the best way to get in touch to organize this?
Yeah. Okay. So on a book list, oh my gosh, now my mind is like all of the things. But a couple that were mentioned. So there was Rest is Resistance, Pleasure Activism, Decolonizing Trauma Work. The author's name is evading me at the moment, but that is a great read. Um, and what was the one? that we were talking about healing the soul wound. Was it healing the soul wound, Vanessa? Renee, yeah, Renee Linklater from Decolonizing Trauma Work. And then healing the soul wound. And his name again is evading me.
Dr. The psychiatrist, right? Or
Yes.
psychologist. Um, let
The
me
book, yeah, the book is called Healing the Soul Wound. And I'm gonna be 100% honest. Vanessa and I are like not 100% sure on the man's indigeneity. He works with a lot of Native American communities, and he has been, when other publications have written about him, he's labeled as Native American, but we can't actually find anything that he himself says that he's Native American. So I just want to put that out. But basically, he talks about looking at healing trauma um, from yeah, okay, Vanessa's got those in there. Healing the Soul Wound. And then Renee Linklater wrote Decolonizing Trauma Work. Healing the Soul Wound is still really great. Anything by Dr. Gabor Mate is amazing. Um, and then as for our work, yes, we do work with organizations. We work with big organizations, medium size, small. If you reach out to us on our website, www.decolonizandrize.com, we'd be happy to have a conversation about anything that we can support your organization with. Oh, and I see Vanessa's popped another one in there. Oh my gosh, and other people are putting books. I gotta
This is
add my
amazing.
list.
Again, save the chat, folks, because there's so much goodness in
I
this
don't think we
chat. But
can. I think
No, we're not.
Kira
We're not
mentioned
allowed
that
to
it's
save
not
the chat.
possible
It's for
to.
oh,
privacy reasons. Yeah.
dang it. Okay, too bad. So, folks, grab all the
All
links
the
while you're here.
resources will be posted on the landing page, so you don't have to.
Ah,
Amazing.
perfect. So the two I shared is Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate, not Indigenous, but he takes a very relational, whole-centered approach, a very decolonized approach to healthcare. Loving that. It doesn't, I'm only halfway through. He doesn't address burnout yet, but it's really about honoring who we are as humans first before anything else. And then another book I recommend, it's called Healing Organizations, Awakening the Conscious of Business to Help Save the World. It's been a while since I read that one. I don't know if they necessarily address burnout, but they talk and they do draw on a lot of Indigenous wisdom in the book and about restoring balance, how it's in our patriarchal, capitalistic, colonial society, we've lost balance. So it's about healing the organization through restoring balance. So those are a couple others I recommend.
Hmm.
Great. That was our last question. Do you guys have any closing remarks you want to say before I end the webinar?
I think before we go in, just to close in a good way and to invite people to share once more in the chat, something we like to do is just share 2 words, maybe 3 words, 2 or 3 words max, to reflect you in this moment. So we can just ensure to bring your voices into this circle one more time before we close. And I'll just read them as they're coming in here. Good vibing, nice, mercy, settled. Itchy Miigwech, resolve to rest, seen, validated, nurtured, re-energized, valued, seen and heard, uplifted and appreciated, gratitude and peace, reverence and gratitude, exhausted and grounded. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, so much. Really enjoyed being in circle with all of you. And we hope to stay connected on LinkedIn or our newsletter.
Yeah, Chimigwech, everyone, for your time and your energy, and for those of you who shared your own experiences so openly. It's places and spaces like this where we can see others' perspectives and experiences, where we know we're not alone. It can help this journey be a lot less isolating. So lots of gratitude to each and every one of you, and to UBC Learning Circle for inviting us in today.
Merci.
Bamapi, everyone.
Thank you to all our guests and to everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, Vanessa and Ariana, for the great discussion and learning more about how to protect ourselves from burnout and creating wellness for ourselves through boundaries. And just before we end this webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. We have beadwork is medicine on December 4th. And then we also have engaging with coming faces through the past. That's with Dr. Talena Atfield. That's on December 12th. All our webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningscircle.ubc.ca, and they're also will be sent through our newsletter. Thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next Learning Circle. Lim Lim, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Serena and Kira.